What's up everybody, welcome back. So in the last episode of our Mech multiplayer project, we made our enemies fire projectiles. So slowly it's starting to look like some sort of a game, but we can't really do anything yet. We can't kill enemies, they can't kill us. So that's what we're gonna do in this episode. We're gonna add health variables for the AI and for the mech, and make sure that everything works so we can actually kill each other. So let's dive right into it. The first thing we want to do is go to our projectiles folder and open our base projectile. And in here, we're going to make sure that we can add radial damage. So we're going to use radial damage for the mech projectile. And for the enemies, we're going to use point damage, but we're going to get to that later. So first of all, let's start in the unprojectile stop event. And in here, we want to add a branch. And we're going to plug in the branch first, and we're going to promote the condition to a variable, and we're going to call this use radial damage. So we can choose whether we want to use it or not. And then let's make a little bit of room here to make things look a little bit cleaner. So plug in the branch first, and if this is true, we're going to apply radial damage with fall off. So these are default damage functions inside of the engine. So we're going to use this one, radial damage with fall off. If this is false, we want to connect it right back up to the multicast projectile hit event. So make sure that we actually call that if we are not applying radial damage. And of course, if we do apply it, we also want to hook that one up. So make sure all pins are hooked back up. And then we're going to promote all of this stuff to variables so we can set them on the child blueprints individually. So let's drag off the base damage, promote to a variable. We're going to do the same thing for the minimum damage. So promote that to a variable. The origin, we can actually use the location from the hit event over here. So from the break hit result, we're going to grab the location and plug that right into the origin of the radial damage. Then we can specify the radius, so we're going to promote those to a variable as well, the inner radius and the outer radius, like so. And then we can also apply our damage fall off as a variable, so let's promote that one as well. And the last thing we're going to do is drag off the damage causer, and we're going to use a reference to ourself over here. So the damage causer is the actor that actually applied the damage. So in this case, that's our projectile. And you could also pass on the controller for other damage cases. So the player controller, that would be in this case. But then we also need to add a controller reference to our projectile. So we're going to skip that. We don't need it in our case. So this should work. So we have our basic apply damage function set up. Let's compile and save this. And now we want to go to our mech projectile to actually set up those variables. So we're going to open the mech main gun projectile. And you want to go into the construction script over here. And here we're going to set all the variables that we just added. So first of all, let's drag off the end, and we're going to set use radial damage. And we're going to set this to true. And then we want to set all of the damage variables. So let's set the base damage. And I'm going to use a value of 150. So it's going to be a one-shot kill for the normal enemies. And then drag off again. And we're going to set the minimum damage. And I'm going to set the minimum damage to 50. Then we can specify the radius. So drag off again, set inner damage radius. And we also want to set the outer radius. So set outer damage radius. So for the inner radius, I'm going to use a value of 75. And for the outer radius, I'm going to use 650. So you can play around with these variables, obviously. Do what you like, but I think this looks pretty okay. And you can actually kill enemies pretty easy with these settings. And the last thing we want to set is the damage fall off. So set the fall off. And I'm going to simply use a value of 1 for the fall off. So compile and save. So we have the variables actually specified inside of the child blueprint. That's good to go. Now we want to make sure that our enemies can take damage. So we're going to go to our enemies folder and we can add all of this stuff inside of our base enemy. So all enemies will have the same handling for damage, and we don't have to set it up for each child individually. So let's see, we can actually use the damage event as I mentioned before. So if we right click, we can look for the event radial damage. And this will actually be called when the other event, so the applied radial damage, is applied. And as you can see by the little sign over here, this will only execute on the server, as it says in the description, authority only. So we don't need to do anything in here to replicate it actually, because we're only going to use the health variable on the server. The server will be the one controlling the health and calculating the health. And since we don't have any health bars below the enemies to show their health, we don't need to replicate this to our clients, so we can simply use this server side only, and that should be fine. So first of all, let's create a new variable inside of the base enemy, and let's call this health. Thank you, autosave. And that's going to be a float, and we want to set a default of 100. So by default the enemy has 100 health. And then over here we're going to start with a branch and make sure that the health is not already 0. So let's drag in the health and compare it so it's equal to 0. Plug it in. And if this is false, then we can continue. So then we're going to set the new health value. So let's drag in a setter, plug it into the false pin over here. And then we're going to grab the health and subtract the damage received over here, so we can simply plug that in from the event. And we want to make sure that we clamp it so we don't actually go below 0, so that way we can simply use the equal node and don't have to use a smaller than, and also we don't end up with any weird variables that are below 0. So we're going to drag off here and we're going to clamp a float. This one, and the minimum is going to be 0 and the maximum is going to be 100. Plug this into the setter. And then at this point we want to check if the enemy is actually dead or not. So we're going to grab another branch, and again we're going to compare the health value with 0. So let's just copy this one and paste it in over here. So if our health is 0 after we subtracted the damage, then we are dead. So the first thing we want to do if we die is make sure that our distance to target function that runs on a timer. So we set the timer in begin play, and we want to make sure that this function stops looping. So we're going to clear a timer by function name. Drag off through pin, clear timer by function name. And we simply want to copy paste the name of the function that we don't want to run anymore. So this will stop the timer from looping. Then we can grab our can attack variable and set this to false as well. So this will make sure that if we are attacking inside of our attacking loop, this will break the loop as well because it's false. And then the next thing we're going to do is stop our movement. So we want to grab our character movement component reference and we're going to stop movement immediately. This one, and plug it in as well. So this all happens server side because this event only executes on the server. And now because our enemy died, we also want to do some stuff for all instances, because things like animations, montages, FX, all that kind of stuff doesn't replicate. So we need to make sure that that actually replicates to the client. And in this case, we're going to use a notify variable for that. So let's create a new variable, and we're going to call this our hit location die and turn it into a vector. And for this one, we're going to set the replication to a rep notify. And as soon as we do that, you can see a function over here is being created that's called onRep hit location die. And when this variable is changed by the server, this function will fire on all instances, so also on the client. So inside of this function, we can do stuff that we want to do to all the clients as well. First, we want to make sure that we set this variable. So drag in a setter, plug it in, and we're going to grab the location from the event at the beginning. So the origin of the radial damage, we're going to plug that in over here. Let's clean this up a little bit. There we go. And now we want to create a small event in here to actually get rid of the corpse of the AI that we can call inside of the function. So let's create a custom event, and we're going to call this remove corpse. And this will actually only execute on the server. So I'm going to grab the comment bubble here and enter server. And all we want to do in here is add a small delay. And I'm going to randomize the delay. So I'm going to right click and get a random integer in range. Random integer in range. And well, you can play around with these values obviously, but I'm going to set it from 3 to 6 seconds. So anywhere in between there, and then the corpse will be deleted. So plug it into the delay, and then we're simply going to destroy this actor. And because we are the server and this actor actually replicates, it will be destroyed for all clients as well. So that's all we want to do in here. And then we're going to go into our onWrap hit location die function. So let's open that one up. So this is what's going to execute on all instances if the AI dies. So let's grab all instances here. And the first thing we want to do is stop any montages that are currently playing. So we're going to drag off and we're going to say stop animation montage. And if we don't actually specify a montage to stop, it will stop the montage that it is currently playing. So we can simply leave this empty and that will stop any montages that might be playing, like the fire montage, for example. Then we're going to grab the character mesh and we're going to set the animation mode. And we don't want to use an animation blueprint anymore, so I'm simply going to say use animation asset, and we're not going to specify any assets to use, so this will make sure there's no animations playing anymore, and also that our animation blueprint is not ticking anymore, so it's not forcing any new animations on the AI after it died. Then we're going to grab our capsule component and we want to make sure that this doesn't have any collision anymore. So we're going to set collision, and for collision enabled, simply say no collision. So collision is also something you want to do on all instances. This is not replicated from the server, so that's why we're doing it in here. And then we're not going to use any death animations, but we're simply going to apply a ragdoll effect and then launch the corpse. So we want to grab the mesh again, and we're going to drag off here and we're going to set a collision profile name. Collision profile name, this one, plug it in over here, and we're going to set the collision profile to ragdoll, and that simply refers to the collision profiles that are in here. So for the mesh over here, you can select the presets, and that's a profile, and we're going to select the ragdoll profile in here. So that's what we're doing. Ragdoll, make sure these names match, so double L at the end. And then we want to simulate physics for the mesh. So we're going to drag off here again and then set simulate physics. So we already had the mesh plugged in, so let's get rid of that one. There we go, and we're going to enable simulate, and then we want to make our corpse fly away, so we're going to add a radial impulse to the mesh as well. So drag off the mesh again and add a radial impulse. This one, plug that in as well. Let's clean it up a little bit. There we go. And then for the radius, I'm going to say 200. And for the strength, I'm going to say 1000. We're going to make this a velocity change, so it's a bit more constant effect and it has more effect. And then for the origin, we're going to plug in our hit location die. So that's the location where the radial damage is actually applied from, so that's where the projectile hit. So this will make our corpse fly away. And then there is one thing left to do, and that's remove the corpse. And we only want to do that server side. So we're going to grab a branch over here and we're going to check if we are the server. And if this is true, then we're going to call our remove corpse event that we just created. Like so. So this is what's going to happen when our AI dies. He's going to fly away in a ragdoll, and then at the end the server is going to destroy the corpse and the entire actor. So let's compile and save, and at this point we should be able to test it, so we should be able to kill our enemies. So let's hit play and see what happens. And as you can see, they fly away in a nicely satisfying ragdoll, and then after a few seconds they will get deleted. And this should also work in multiplayer, so let's grab a 2-player setup, and we want to play as a listen server. Hit play, and it looks like it's crashing. No, it's not, it just took a while. So let me grab both screens in here, and I'm gonna grab the client first. So let's fire with the client. And as you can see, it replicates from the client to the server, and all of the enemies actually die when we shoot at them, so that's good. And it should work the other way around as well. So if we fire with the server, then again it should replicate to our client, and those will die on all instances. And the corpses actually get deleted for both instances as well, so everything there seems to be working. So that wasn't too bad. We actually have the health for the AI working, and we can kill those guys, so that's good. Now let's look at the other way around, where we're gonna add the health for the mech and make sure that the AI can actually kill us. So let's take a look at AI killing our mechs. And to do that, we're gonna add a DamageType. And in this small project it isn't really necessary, to be honest, but in a bigger project where you have multiple enemies and not every enemy may be available in every map, you don't really want to cast to an enemy if it's not loaded. And we can use a DamageType, so we have a very light class to cast to, and to identify where this damage is coming from and what type of damage it is, without actually having to cast to any of our enemies. So as I mentioned, in this project we are going to have the enemies loaded anyway, because we have one map and we're always using the same enemy. So in our case it wouldn't really make any difference if we cast to an enemy, because it's loaded in the memory anyways. But in a bigger project where multiple enemies are available and not every enemy is in every level, this could benefit. So I'm just gonna set it up the way it kind of should look, so that way you know how that works as well. So in the root folder I'm going to create a new folder and call this DamageTypes. And let's open it up, and in here we're going to right click and create a new blueprint class, and then we're going to expand to all classes and look for a DamageType. Select it and create it, and we're simply going to call this BPAI weapon damage. And that's really all we need to do. So we can open it up, and as you can see there are a few default things you could set up in here, and you can actually add variables as well, so you can expand this functionality a little bit. But you can also see it's a really light class. It doesn't have any components, no meshes, things like that, so it's very light class to cast to. So in that way it's better to use than casting to an enemy. So we have this set up. Now we want to go to our projectiles, and we're going to open our base projectile again. And in here we're going to add a second part where we can do damage of the false spin over here. So for our AI we're not going to use radial damage, we're simply going to apply point damage or normal damage. So we're going to disconnect the false pin, and we actually have a bit of room, so that's good. And from the false pin, we're going to drag off and we're going to look for apply damage. And we're simply going to use the upper one, apply damage, so no point damage, radial damage, the normal one. Make sure we hook this back up to the multicast projectile hit, so we cannot forget that one. And then we need to plug in a damaged actor, so we can grab that from the hit result over here. That's the actor that's actually been hit by the projectile, so plug it in, and that should be our mech. Then we're gonna specify the base damage, and we're simply gonna use the same variable that we created for the radial damage, so we can plug that in over here. The damage causer again is a reference to ourself, so that's the projectile that caused the damage. And then for the damage type class over here, we're gonna select our BPAI weapon damage, so we can actually identify what kind of damage it was. So again, that's all we need to do inside of our base projectile. So let's compile and save, close it. And now we want to open our write or rate projectile. And inside of the construction script, we're going to set up these variables again. So first of all, drag off the end, and we're going to set use radial damage. And this should be false by default, but let's make sure we just set it so we know it's working correctly. So we're going to set it to false. Then we need to set our base damage. So set base damage. And for this one, I'm going to say a base damage of 3, because there's quite a few enemies at some point in the game. So we don't want the player to die after a few shots. He can actually take quite a bit of damage. He's a big mech. So, but again, do what you like in here. You can play around with these values. And so that should pretty much be all. Yeah, that should work. So this is all we need to set in here. Let's compile and save it. And then we want to have a HUD for our mech, so we can actually display our health and see how much health we have left and things like that. So let's do that first. We're going to go to the UI folder and we're going to right click, create a new user interface widget blueprint. And in here, select the user widget. And then I'm going to call this our widget blueprint player HUD. And let's open it up. So in here, we're going to start with a canvas panel. So that's under the panel section, drop in a canvas panel. And then we want to add a bar. So we're going to use a progress bar. Let's drag it on top of the canvas panel. And let me grab my example in here. So first of all, I'm going to rename this to our HealthBar. And we want to make sure that this is a variable. So let's enable that one at the top right over here. Then I'm going to anchor it to the left side of the screen using this anchor. And then we want to set the position. So I'm going to set the position to 20 for X. And then the offset at the top is going to be 12 or 15, whatever you like. The size is going to be 25, and then the offset at the bottom is going to be 12 again. So we have a vertical health bar over here. Then if you downloaded the assets from my Discord at the beginning of the series, we should have a filler image inside of there. So we want to go to our style, and then we're going to go to the fill image, and we're going to set that to our health bar filler. So expand it and look for a health bar filler, and that's simply a little square image. It's nothing special, to be honest, but it just looks a little bit better than just a solid color, in my opinion. So we're going to set that, and then we're going to say over here, draw as image, and we want the tiling to be vertical. So set that as well, and then we can set the tint to something green, so we can actually have a green health bar like so. And it's not displaying any image. So oh yeah, for the bar fill type we want to say bottom to top over here, and then for the percent I'm going to set it to 1, so we can actually see it's filling up. Then I'm also going to change the background image over here. So right now it's simply white, and I'm going to make it a little bit gray image. and then have an alpha of 0.5, so it's a bit transparent. And now you can actually see the image appear as well. So let's hit OK. So that should be most of our health bar. We can set a little bit of padding if you like. So I'm going to set the padding to 2 to make the image a little bit smaller and have the background appear at the sides as well, but do whatever you prefer. So I'm going to expand it a little bit. Yeah, that looks pretty okay to me. So we have our health bar set up, and now we want to create a function inside of the graph to actually update our health. So let's create a new function in here, and let's call this update health. And we want to give it an input, and that's the actual player health. So let's call this player health, and that's a float variable. So because we are using values from 0 to 100, we want to drag off here and divide the value through 100. And then we can grab our health bar and set the percent in here. And simply plug this in. So this should update the health bar to the correct value. So let's compile and save that one as well. Now we want to actually display this HUD on our character if we start the game. So for that we're going to go to our Mech player controller and open it up. And let me grab my notes in here and also move them to the correct position. Let me see. Yeah, there we are, I think. So we want to go to event begin play, and over here we have the local player controller branch. So everything we do over here is on the local instance of the player controller. And that's actually the only instance that can have a HUD or widgets. So this is good. We want to make sure if we create any widgets in multiplayer, we always do it on the local player controller or the owning player, which is the same thing. So we're going to go all the way at the end over here, and over here we want to create the HUD. And for that I'm going to create a simple function. So let's create a new function first, and let's call this UI show player HUD. And in here we're going to create a widget. So right click, create widget. We're going to select our player HUD class over here, and then we're going to drag off and promote it to a variable. So this is our widget blueprint player HUD. And again, if you set the class first and then promote it to a variable over here, it will say the correct class. If you don't set the class in here first, then make sure you assign the correct player HUD class over here to the variable as well. So this is set up for the owning player. That's going to be a reference to our self. So simply look for self. Then we're going to grab the HUD variable and check if it's valid first. So if it's already been created previously, plug it in. If it's not valid, we're going to create it. And if it's already valid, then all we need to do is add it to the viewport. So add to viewport. And make sure we plug in both branches. So the isValid one and the create one as well. So that should be good. Let's compile, save, go back to the event graph, and at the end of our begin play, we want to show our player HUD. So as I mentioned, on the local branch, so that's simply the only branch that we have at this point. After the input mode game only, UI show player HUD. Okay, that should be good to go. Let me double check. Yeah, that should be fine. So now we want to go into our mech and make sure that we can actually take damage. So let's compile and save our player controller and open our mech character. And in here, first of all, we want to create a health variable. So let's create a new variable, call this health. This is float. And in this case, we do want to replicate it. So obviously, if we are a client, we want to be able to see the health on our HUD. So if we only do this server side, we cannot use it. So we want to make sure that the server replicates this. And then we can set up the events that will actually take our damage. So let's go to an empty spot somewhere. And in here we can look for the event damage, and that's going to be any damage. And again, this is server only. So all of these default damage events in the engine only run server side. So we have to take that into account. The first thing we're going to do is grab a branch in here and make sure this is actually AI damage. So the mechs cannot damage each other with their projectiles. So that's mainly the reason why we're doing this. So we're going to drag off the damage type, and from this we want to get a class. And then we can simply compare the damage type class to our AI weapon damage. So we're going to do is equal to. And in here we're going to select our AI weapon damage type that we created earlier. So select that one over here, plug it in. And only if this is true, then we're going to apply damage. But first, let's make sure that we're not already dead. So we're going to grab a second branch, grab our health float, and compare it to 0. Plug it in as well. So if we're already dead, we don't want to do anything anymore. So then we're going to simply stop execution. If this is false, we're going to continue. And we want to set our new value. So plug the setter into the false pin. And again, like we did with the AI, we're going to grab our health and then subtract the damage that comes from the event. So we can simply grab that over here. And we want to clamp this float again, so we cannot exceed any values that we don't want. So let's drag off here and clamp float. The minimum is 0 and the maximum is 100. And then plug that in over here. So this is server side, as this event over here mentions. So this variable will already replicate to our clients. So now all we really need to do is make sure that we update it on our HUD. And instead of using is server branch, because that won't help us over here, we're always on the server instance. We need to know if we are the actual local instance. Because if we are the server and we are the local instance, that means we can simply call our player HUD without any replication. And if we are the server and we are not the local instance, that means we are automatically one of the clients. So in that case, we want to replicate it to our owning client. So we're going to grab a branch, and in here we're going to check if we are locally controlled. Is locally controlled, plug that in over here. So if this is true, we are the server and we are the local instance of the server, so we can simply grab our player HUD, and we have that on our player controller. So we're going to grab the player controller, drag off here, get player HUD over here, and then on the HUD we can call our update health function. So update health, this goes into the true pin, and we can simply plug in our health variable in here. And now if we are a client, we need to replicate this from the server to our owning client instance. So we're going to right click and we're going to create a custom event, and we're going to call this owner, and then HUD update health. Excuse me. So we want to execute this on the owning client. So replicates over here, run on owning client. And if we are on the owning instance, we can actually access our local player controller, which has the widget on it. So then we can copy and paste this stuff, and we're simply going to pass on the variable inside of the event over here. And then if we are not locally controlled in this event, then we want to call this function. So we're going to say owner HUD update health, and again plug in our health variable like so. So this should make our HUD update as well. And I think at this point we should be able to test this. Yeah, we should be pretty good to go. So let's compile and save, and let's hit play and see what happens. So obviously our mech can't die yet, but we should be able to take any damage, and it should update our health bar if we are lucky. And we are not. It doesn't work for either the client or the host, so that's messed up. Let me see if it's AI weapon damage. If it's 0, that's false. Set it. We didn't set the default value to 100, so this will automatically cause this branch to be true, and that's why it's not working. So for the default health value for the mech, we're gonna set it to 100, and then let's have another go. And hopefully this time it actually works. And there you go. As you can see, the host is taking damage, and you can see the health bar going down. So as I mentioned, if we are dead, nothing's gonna happen yet. And let's see if it's also working for the client. If we walk in between here and we're catching the bullets, then again our health bar goes down, so we're actually taking damage from the projectiles. So that's pretty cool. That's also working already, no errors, so the replication is set up properly as well. And that's not too bad. Well, we already are past our 40-minute mark, so I think I'm gonna leave it at this for this episode. In the next episode, I want to add some damage FX to our mech. So there will actually be some flames coming out of the mech at certain damage levels, so we can see we are taking damage and we are close to dying. And we're also going to set up the actual dying for the mech as well. So I could show that quickly over here with my example project in the single player mode. So this is what we're going to add in the next episode. And as you can see, by the way, I've also added a countdown at the beginning of rounds. But at this point, if we take damage, and it's going to compile the shaders, so it looks really shitty, but you can see over here the flames are starting to appear on the mech if we take damage. So it didn't look too great without the shaders being compiled, but that's what we're gonna do in the next episode. So thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider leaving a like or subscribing to the channel. And if you want to get your hands on the project files, go take a look at the Discord. I'll upload them after each episode went live on YouTube, so you can download those for free from the Discord. Check out the code in there and see how everything works. And there's also a lot of other stuff you can download from the Discord for free as well. So thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Bye bye.